Hello, everyone. Pam Jacobson, your host of Three Things You Need to Know. Sorry, a little bit late getting started. Had some trouble with connecting this morning. For those of you who don't know me, I have a long history in healthcare. I am board certified in functional medicine, master's trained and licensed in Chinese medicine, and I started my healthcare career in conventional Western medicine as an oncology nurse. Work with clients all over the country, helping them to optimize their health and regain their vitality and quality of life. You can reach me through any of my social media venues. And also my website at thehealingsanctuaryoc.com. So, without further ado, let's get started. My first subject of the day is melatonin. So, I've been getting a lot of questions from patients and others that are watching my content production on a weekly basis. And a lot of questions about melatonin. What is it? Why do I need it? How much do I need? Isn't it dangerous? Lots of questions about melatonin. So I thought I would take a few minutes and just give you a little bit of an education about melatonin because it's really in the press these days, being touted as something that we should all be using with the current COVID situation that we're all facing. So I wanted to explain why that might be and what it is that they're talking about. So first of all, I think the thing that you need to understand about melatonin, most of you or many of you know that it has something to do with sleep. It's sold over the counter in the United States, however, not in Europe or in Australia. You have to have a prescription. Um, and it's oftentimes sold as a jet lag treatment or a way to help people sleep. So the reason why it's needs a prescription in other countries is it's actually a hormone, right? Most of us don't know that. So yes, you can walk into Rite Aid or Whole Foods or Mother's Kitchen here in Orange County, and you can buy melatonin over the counter, a hormone that's made inside your brain. And I do think that that's a little bit problematic, especially if you don't know what you're doing and you don't know what kind of dose you should take. So hopefully, this information will help you to become better informed to make a good decision in that regard. So it is a hormone. It's made in a little pea-sized gland in the brain called the pineal gland, and it's stimulated by darkness. So it starts its production around 9 p.m. And its primary role is maintaining circadian rhythm. So circadian rhythm is the sleeping waking cycle, and melatonin is sort of the sleeping part of that rhythm. And like I said, it starts its production to ramp up at around 9 p.m. and it lasts for about 12 hours or so, depending on the individual. There's several things that can really decrease melatonin production. Its substrate or its base fuel, if you will, is serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain. So if serotonin is compromised in some way, you may not make enough melatonin. Alcohol impacts it, poor diet, lots of stress, other disease processes. So there's a number of aging. It naturally declines as we age. So there's a few reasons why a person might have low melatonin. You can test it, but it's a bit challenging because here's what happens with melatonin. It recedes in the light, whether that's fake light that you turned on to get up and go to the bathroom or the light of morning, right? So melatonin, it ramps up around 9 p.m. as it gets dark, helps you to stay asleep. And then as the light comes up in the morning, as the sun rises, melatonin recedes and you wake up. So, but you can imagine if you wake up in the middle of the night and you turn on the light or you look at your phone, you've just, created an issue with your melatonin balance. So need to be very careful there. Also, sleeping timing makes a big difference for melatonin, right? If melatonin is starting to ramp up at 9 p.m. and you don't go to bed until 1 or 2 a.m., and it's only going to be really melatonin in play for about 12 hours, you've really, compromised that whole circadian rhythm. So I've talked in previous episodes about sleep and sleep hygiene and sleep timing, so you can refer back to that. But the bottom line is you can kind of screw up your melatonin if you're not keeping a really good, steady, reasonable sleep cycle. So I said its main role is to maintain circadian rhythm and the sleeping waking cycle. But the reason why it's in the press these days related to the COVID virus is that it has lots of other properties, not the least of which is it's highly anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. And there's been a few articles and studies looking at its protective benefit for the lung. Now, we know that the COVID virus is a respiratory virus, and the issues that we're seeing is the damage to the lung tissue. And so when I look at the current kind of underground COVID research, looking at what the immunologists and the virologists and others are recommending, melatonin keeps popping up as one of those things that should be part of a whole approach to protecting ourselves in this kind of COVID virus era that we're in. So, lung protection, but not only lung, generally inflammatory protection. It's being heavily studied in the treatment of certain hormone uh, dependent cancers like prostate and breast cancer for its actual tumor inhibiting properties. Because it is very involved in hormone release, especially in women, it all throughout a woman's life, her monthly cycle, as well as the transition into menopause. Melatonin is one of the hormones involved in that process, and it can also lessen menopausal symptoms. So, if you are someone who's suffering with hot flashes and trouble sleeping at night, melatonin can be helpful. In addition to that, it's heart protective. It can help with chronic pain, especially the types of muscle and musculoskeletal pain that makes it difficult for us to sleep. And it can also help with stress resilience. So melatonin is an amazing hormone in the body. And like I said, it's easily put out of balance, and probably in many of us, especially given the levels of stress we're all under at this point, and the fact that we're probably all struggling with our self-care routine on a daily basis. Melatonin can be, I think, a helpful additive, and is certainly being recommended in this current kind of COVID virus time frame that we find ourselves in. So, how much melatonin? There is a lot of science going on with melatonin, but there's not a lot of agreement about dosing. It is a hormone you make in your brain, so you want to be careful to not shut down that production or not shut down that feedback loop. And so the idea here would be to start low and work your way up to a point where you're getting the benefits that you're looking for. So most of the science agrees that 5 milligrams, 5 to 6 milligrams would be your max. For me personally, clinically, I tell my patients no more than 3 milligrams, and I have them start with a milligram and work their way up to that. If you're getting deep restful sleep, and sleeping through the night, then that dose you're on is good enough. If you're having vivid dreaming or waking with a headache or having um, trouble in the morning with feeling groggy, you may be getting too much melatonin, so you may need to dial it back. There's lots of different delivery systems for melatonin. You can take in capsules, there's topical forms, there's spray, sublingual form. You have to find what works for you. Some folks need sustained release where they get a slow release of the melatonin over the night, and others of us are fine with the regular releasing melatonin. The rule of thumb would be about 30 minutes before bed. Don't take it too early. You don't want to be taking melatonin at 5 or 6 o'clock when that's not the natural time that the brain would begin to ramp up its production of melatonin. So really about 30 minutes before your desired sleep time would be the appropriate time to take melatonin. If you feel you need higher doses or you want to use that for some other type of a treatment, then that's the time to really work with a practitioner such as myself to guide you along that. But in terms of our everyday use, up to 3 milligrams, 30 minutes before bed is what I recommend. So, anyway, melatonin, great thing to use. Obviously, has lots of really important benefits, and certainly, at least for the time being, looks like something that's important on our prevention list for the virus. All right. Point number two, if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat box. Point number two, my talk today was a question about being motivated. Last week I talked about being stuck. That's more of a plateau. You're moving along and you just can stop making progress toward your goal. Today I wanted to talk about being unmotivated. There was an article out in a cognitive behavioral journal, a psychology or psychiatry journal, earlier this week about the impacts of inflammation in the body on motivation. Our motivation um, neurotransmitter in our brain is dopamine. And dopamine, actually, probably all the neurotransmitters, but particularly dopamine, can be impacted by high levels of inflammation, chronic inflammation in the body. And that can lead to a lack of motivation. Motivation, whether there's a reward for it, motivation is a feeling of either I can't do that or I'm just not going to do that. I won't do that. And dopamine is that neurotransmitter that helps us make a decision to do something and to stick with it. So if you're finding yourself unmotivated or you start things and you don't finish them, you may be suffering from a little bit of a dopamine imbalance. And that very likely can be caused by an increase in inflammation. And I believe that the unique time that we find ourselves in is very conducive to the increase in inflammation for all of us for a number of reasons. We tend to be more sedentary, especially those of us working at home. I know for myself, I'm sitting in front of a computer all day now rather than up and walking around in an office like I was before. We're tending to make less, less healthy dietary choices, partly because our routines are completely impacted. Also, we're home near the pantry, which maybe doesn't have the best choices, or we're feeling unmotivated and we're looking for carbohydrates and things that the brain requires to help with that. So, dietary choices really impact inflammatory response, lack of sleep, high stress. I mean, all of those things I think are going on for many of us in this situation that we find ourselves in. Now, I just talked about melatonin, which is a great anti inflammatory. So, adding that will help. Certainly, managing your stress response. I've talked in other episodes about how to do that. Today, I wanted to talk about the kind of what are the top, because I wanted to tell you all the story over the 4th of July weekend. And it leads me to this understanding, even after all of the training I've had and all of the years I've been in healthcare, I just found this really quite eye opening and then amusing and then frightening. Like if I did this and I felt this way, I can only imagine what my patients and friends and family and those that rely on me to help them, guide them through that type of information. So I'm going to tell you a funny story about my 4th of July weekend that has all to do with inflammation and motivation. But what I'm finding with inflammation is that our dietary choices are probably one of the biggest impactors and one of the areas that we actually have a lot of control over. So I wanted to talk about kind of the top 7 things that happen in our diets, maybe even unbeknownst to us, that are big inflammatory contributors. Number one would be artificial sweetening agents like sucralose, Splenda, your aspartame or Equal, the little blue packet, any kind of chemically artificial sweetener. Stevias, depending on how they're processed, are typically okay. And some of the sugar alcohols, if they're not consumed in large amounts. But I'm talking about absolutely artificial, chemically artificial sweeteners like aspartame and Splenda and Sweet and Low, your saccharin. So those artificial sweeteners are highly inflammatory. Your bad fats, things like corn oil and other types of vegetable oils, even to some degree safflower and sunflower oil, which is used extensively in a lot of your bagged chips and especially those things that they call natural or healthier for you, but they still have these very highly processed vegetable oils, which are high in omega 6s, which are the inflammatory omegas. Listen to my show from last week to get more information about that. Processed meats, high cured and smoked meats like bacon and sausage and lunch meats, the nitrites and nitrates to preserve those and cure those meats, highly, highly inflammatory. You can get much, much healthier options in uncured choices. High consumption of alcohol is a big inflammatory contributor. Foods that are high in sugar content and refined carbohydrates like breads and pastas and donuts and cookies and crackers and anything that's in a box or a bag is going to be a big inflammatory contributor. So, and then probably the worst of all, an ingredient that I believe and many believe should be completely permanently removed from foods in for human consumption would be high fructose corn syrup. So I want you to remember high fructose corn syrup, and I want you to really start looking at the label of every packaged food that you pick up, because here's my story. So it's 4th of July. I am sheltering in place with known uninfected family members, and there's a pool involved. And everybody wants to have margaritas, but we don't have everything that we need. So I am selected as the tribute to run to the market to get what we need. And typically in the past, margaritas are one of my favorite alcoholic drinks when I'm going to, treat myself. And I would typically just go in and get a good bottle of tequila and some type of a Jose Cuervo margarita mix, that bright yellow, neon yellow bottle of stuff that's right next to the tequila. And I would get a little can of Minute Maid, Limeade out of the frozen section, and voila, we've got a reasonably good margarita. And I don't know what possessed me this day. I think I was feeling like, maybe I'm not quite right on track with my health, and I'm up a couple of pounds. And for whatever reason, I turn around the margarita mix bottle, that neon yellow bottle, to see what gives it that neon yellow color and what else might be in there. And lo and behold, on that label, which is quite a long ingredient label for something that seems pretty simple, number one ingredient is high fructose corn syrup. Now, I just told you that's like the most inflammatory thing that you can put in your body. That's the first ingredient. Yellow dye number whatever, 5 or 6, is what gives it that neon yellow color. And a whole host of other chemical things I can't even begin to pronounce. And it is very clear to me that that is just a bottle of chemicals that I'm going to put in my alcoholic drink. Now, alcohol, again, it's an inflammatory agent, but I'm choosing to have a little bit of alcohol for 4th of July. I'm certainly not going to throw fuel on that fire by adding in a bunch of other inflammatory things. And this is just chock full. So right next to that on the shelf is a bottle of Skinnygirl Margarita mix. So I'm thinking, oh, well, that's got to be better. So I turn around to look at that label, still has yellow dye, but instead of all of the sugar and high fructose corn syrup, they're using artificial sweeteners, aspartame, and sucralose. So not a great choice. I'm just swapping one inflammatory agent for another. Fortunately, at this store that I went to, there was an organic, natural margarita mix. Now, by this time, I'm pretty jaded. And so I'm thinking, oh, yeah, right. So I turn around the bottle and it only has a few ingredients in it, which is always a good sign. That's shorter your ingredient label. And if you know what all the words mean, that's always a good start. And in this case, it was still a high sugar content, but the sugar was coming from agave nectar, which is a natural sugar. It still will, yes, increase your glycemic load, which can contribute to inflammation. But it was a whole heck of a lot better with no other inflammatory ingredients. And so that was my choice. So then I head on over to the frozen section to get my can of limeade. And I think, wow, maybe I better look at the ingredients, since I was totally shocked when I looked at the margarita mix. So I pull that can out, right? I have one choice. It's Minute Maid limeade. That's what I've always used in my margaritas. I pull it out, I turn around the can. Guess what the first ingredient is? High fructose corn syrup. And in fact, lime is like, I don't know. I don't even know if there's actually lime in it. I think it's got green food coloring and high fructose corn syrup and some kind of a chemical that makes it taste like lime. So obviously I was like, oh, hell no. And I put that right back on the shelf. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have to just get creative because there is no other frozen lime choice for me. So I just march on over to the fruit section, buy a couple of real limes, take it all home, and make my margarita. And it tasted amazing. And nobody in the group knew this whole process that I went through to make them the least inflammatory margarita that we possibly could have. Everybody loved it. Everybody enjoyed it. So the moral of the story here, guys, sorry, it was a long story, but I just thought it was funny because I've been doing this health thing for a long time. And many of you, some of you probably don't invite me to your parties because you think I'm the food police, but I really do enjoy myself. And I really do love margaritas by the pool. And but the moral of the story is you can still enjoy yourself, but make the healthiest, least inflammatory choice that you possibly can. And you do that by informing yourself, which means turn around the bottle and look at the label, right? If it comes in a can, a box, a bottle, a bag, if it has a label on it, you should be reading it and you should know what's in there. Because again, we're talking about you're unmotivated, you're home, you can't get your butt out of bed, you can't get the things done that you want to do. If that's happening, your inflammatory level is high. Why is that? Well, you've got more stress, you're moving your body less, your sleep probably sucks, so use your melatonin. But also the stuff you're putting in your mouth. And if that happened to be a margarita over 4th of July weekend that you didn't bother to eliminate as many of the inflammatory factors from, chances are you just fueled that fire. So, inflammation, a big deal. A lot of it comes from what we're consuming. So, make sure that you educate yourself on what is in what you're consuming. Again, the top 7 things: artificial sweeteners, cured processed meats, your bad fats that are in just about everything that's packaged and processed. If I use chips now, if I eat chips or crackers, I want them to be made with avocado oil or coconut oil or olive oil. So those are the fat. Not easy to find. I will be the first one to admit there's not a tortilla chip out there that I found that's made with avocado oil, unfortunately. The high sugar foods, your refined carbohydrate foods, and foods that are very high in sugars. I said artificial sweeteners. I think also artificial colorings, right? Look for those dyes in the food. Your high fructose corn syrup, the worst thing that you could consume. And then high amounts of alcohol. So that's your inflammatory foods. You need to be careful about how much of that stuff you allow into your diet. All right, so moving on quickly, I'm gonna for the next few weeks. The third part of the show is going to be just a virus update, and I'm passionate about this, guys, because there's so much misinformation and hyped up information that we're seeing in kind of the mainstream news media. So much of it's turned very political, and I'm really interested in the real underlying stuff. How are we treating the virus? What does it do in the body? How can we protect ourselves? There were 6,000 new cases reported as on one day, which was the 6th of July. That's the latest information. And most of those cases, that was in Southern California, or in the state of California. So 6,000 new cases in one day on the 6th of July. The vast majority of those cases, or the largest numbers of those cases, are in the younger population, 18 to mid 40s, somewhere in that range. Most likely because that's a population that in the beginning was misled into believing that if you're young and you're healthy, you're not likely to get very sick from the virus. Um, and then I heard reports, one of these, because as these cases are increasing, I'm also seeing more patients in my practice that are reporting to me that they've tested positive. And one such client had a very big milestone birthday just before 4th of July weekend, and had a dinner party to celebrate, and had invited a guest who was asymptomatic but positive and didn't know it. And now, unfortunately, a high number of the people who attended that party are positive. And what's interesting is this was a more middle-aged to higher middle-aged group of folks, but some of them are very mildly symptomatic, like my client, and then others of them are very ill, high fevers, in bed, very sick. And so again, what that shows us is that the virus, it is different for different people. We don't completely understand the reason. There's probably some genetic predisposition to that. It probably also depends on how much viral load you got. So maybe at this party, the very sick gentleman that I'm thinking about spent a lot of time with the asymptomatic person. Maybe they talked a lot. They weren't wearing masks. It was an intimate dinner party. They all thought that they were safe. So, again, and then I spoke with this client later, and she said, I don't feel bad. I've had a couple sniffles. I'm positive, yes, but I've heard that the virus is weakening. So I wanted to address that because in all of the research that I'm looking at and listening to on a daily basis, the virus doesn't weaken. It can mutate into other viruses or other ways to replicate in the body. It can join with other viruses. They can commingle and create something new, but they don't weaken. And what we're likely to be seeing in this particular case is, again, a difference in the viral load. Perhaps the sicker people spent more time with the affected person, or were, maybe really close to one another speaking, where the rest of them were more spread out. That's a possibility. The sicker gentleman had some kind of pre-existing genetic issue or maybe some pre-existing health condition that he wasn't aware of that predisposed him to be sicker. That's a possibility. Also, the efforts that we're making out there in the healthcare setting to treat people earlier, the understandings that we do have led to different treatment in hospital. So, because we're seeing higher cases reported but lower death rates, does not mean the virus is weaker. I just want to be really clear about that. The virus is not weaker. We're doing a better job of managing it. And yes, there are going to be probably a vast number of people who may get the virus and either don't know it because they don't have any symptoms or they get mild symptoms. And I'm like, I'm yay for you. That's great. But it doesn't mean that the virus is weakening or that as a population, we can relax ourselves because we think even if I do get it, it's going to be very mild. There's no way that you know that, right? You don't know if you're that person that if you contract the virus that you may have feel very ill for a couple of weeks or even get sick enough to be hospitalized. So the bottom line is, guys, that you still have a major responsibility to yourself and to all of us to protect. And that is wear your mask in public, socially distance, avoid gatherings. I think especially because we're seeing such an increase in cases really across the United States. I mean, California is getting a little bit picked on, but really if California stepped up their testing efforts, so a lot of it probably has to do with us being much more cognizant of positive cases, where in other parts of the country they may not be doing that. So there's lots of reasons why we can see fluctuations in these numbers, but it doesn't change the fact that the virus exists. It is growing in numbers in terms of its infection rate. It is not weakened. We do every day understand a little bit more, and we're doing a little bit better job of treating and certainly understanding what we can do when we go out in public to protect ourselves. Last week, I talked about antibody testing. I want to reiterate that just because you've had the virus, especially if you're somebody who got it, I was just kind of had some mild symptoms. Now I've had it, so yay, I can go out and do what I want in public. Not necessarily true. We don't know if you are actually immune. We don't know how long you would be immune. But more importantly, and I want you to really hear this, is there is some indication that an infected, virally infected person can continue to shed virus for quite some time. We've got lots of reports of people who are still showing positive viral loads even weeks after they've been infected and are no longer symptomatic. So I think it just really highlights for all of us the individual responsibility that we all have in protecting each other. Okay, so if you've had the virus, it doesn't mean that you should not wear your mask in public and continue to socially distance for all of those reasons that I mentioned. So that's the viral update. Melatonin could be your friend. So I would, if I were all of you out there listening, add melatonin to your daily regimen, up to 3 milligrams at bedtime. Reach out to me if you want some help in getting a good quality. And manage your inflammation, guys, right? Manage what you're putting in your mouth. Get up out of that chair and move. Get restful sleep. Use your melatonin to help you with that. Manage your stress response. It's a really stressful time for all of us. So there you go. 3 things you need to know. I'm right here every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. or 9:02 today since I had some technical difficulty. I look forward to your inputs, to your questions, to your feedback. If you're watching this later as a video, you can reach out to me through my website and drop me an email if you want me to cover a particular topic. All right, guys, take care. See you next Wednesday.